we're
one
gonna
of
let Sammy Young speak.
that's one of the
I'm going
worst
to say my
ever
point before we
now.
divert. So, what I'll
Jeez.
say is the following. To the
Just
question that Dan had made quite a while ago is I do like the idea that the Ukrainians have with this broad line offensive. I just don't like how they carried it out. I would have liked for them to put all the pressure from day one. Like, if they go balls to the wall, maybe they can achieve somewhere a point that breaks. Somewhere. They didn't do that. They just did
The
this
problem
little
is
thing. They
they
started
didn't have any
investing
air
in it.
support. They didn't have any air support, and they didn't have any artillery support. So,
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
you
they
could
could
still have
drive
success
fast, but they
without
can
that.
adjust the artillery and they can adjust the target.
They can still succeed. Like the
You
US
could still have
didn't.
Yeah,
success.
but they got. I mean, they're getting hammered the whole way. They were getting hammered while they were sitting there waiting to get through the
The
minefields.
Taliban's
I
were getting
mean,
hammered.
Like, remember
They
how it
There's
were.
went down
places where
in Kharkiv last year, I believe, where they were able to attack in two different places. The Russians were amassed their army down south, right, and they broke through much more successfully up north, where it was manned by a skeleton crew. So
yeah.
I think that they maybe thought that there's something like that they could. Maybe they really bought their own propaganda about, and thought they were that successful, and they
Okay,
thought they could
so
propaganda.
I mean, there's
yeah,
been
what I
hundreds of
meant by what I
T9.
said. Sorry, Tom. Yeah,
There's
what
been
I meant
hundreds
by
of
what I
T.
said.
There's been
Okay,
hundreds of T9. There's been hundreds of T90s all last year seen in the Zaporizhia area, plus all kinds of units. I mean, there's no way they thought that place was like lightly manned or undermanned. I mean, plus you had all the stuff from the pullback from Kherson. I mean,
okay.
they're just idiots, whoever's leading them.
So what I meant to say is the following. Ukraine doesn't lack manpower. Like, that's not something they lack. What they lack is material. We know that, right?
no.
more or less, yeah.
Oh, they
Yeah,
have
it's
enough
true.
material now. Their problem
They're
is
lacking.
they will have enough material for a long time, but they won't have enough manpower. Somewhere in time, manpower will be wasted. Material will be always coming. The problem, like Dan was saying, somewhere in time, we'll see that something was going to be wasted. I think it's people. Because, as he was saying, the West is not prepared to deal with the responsibility of losing so many people for no reason. Because, as he was saying, if this was really NATO, American troops, they will try to prepare people mentally to be secure, to go to war. But it's not what they're doing now. They're just wasting people.
Okay, so what I was going to say is if they do a whole broad front attack, keeping pressure across the entire front, the Russians can only concentrate their artillery and air force in certain parts of that front. Like, I know they have a lot of artillery, they have a lot of air force, they can only cover so much.
I agree.
So,
There's places where they could have exploited it, yeah.
yeah, and
Okay.
that's what I meant. If they do a whole broad front assault, those places would have been exposed. And then they can bring the material that they have acquired, and punch there. That's all.
It's time to ask the really cynical question that everybody sort of raises and then drops, which is, are they actually trying to get all the people who really want to fight for Ukraine as a country killed? Because if they do, this is the way to do it. Dan's right. This military is not an exception to the general purpose rules of training and development. You've got to give people achievable objectives so they think they can meet them, and then they continue. Like, I've done a lot of training, and I can tell you, we do not start with the hardest problems ever. It wouldn't work.
Exactly.
Everyone would be gone. They'd be out of the class. They'd fail. They'd quit. So when you see like incidents like this seemingly vast waste of people, and then you see interesting cracks like the Russians have finally decided to send the ethnic Hungarian prisoners to Hungary and not to Ukraine, which is actually really vastly huge if you think about it.
Yeah, yeah.
This is actually at the moment where they're starting to sift out. You want to die for Ukraine? Here, go die for Ukraine. All this is a weapons test. But you're an ethnic Hungarian. You didn't want to die for Ukraine. We'll send you to Hungary. They're literally triaging the troops right now. And so this thing is the worst kind of meat grinder. It's actually a form of ethnic cleansing, but it may be an ethnic cleansing of nationalistic Ukrainians at this point.
I don't know.
Craig,
I still think there's enough Russians that they're throwing at the other Russians. I still think that the ethnic Ukrainians, the really hardcore guys, are the ones that are rounding people up in Odessa.
The really hardcore ones, yeah.
The what you said, Craig, is really important because I remember, I don't know if it was a Marine or an American soldier, perhaps it was Mattis, who said like some American said that someone else will raise your children. And I think about this war because so many Ukrainian men will die that when Russia comes and settles this land, ethnically, blood Russians will take over Ukraine, whether they want it or not. So they've literally effed themselves. The Ukrainians, by sending all their military-aged men, have bred themselves out of the equation. And we're not talking about like a small dent. We're talking about an entire generation, and perhaps 2 generations of men will die in this war. And that will outbreed themselves. So, I mean, I don't know who's planning this or who's forcing these men to fight, but I think about all these different ways that they're screwing up Ukraine. And it's a sad thing because if you come to Russia, the Russian people see Ukrainians without hate. They see them as brothers. As far as Siberia, like there's Ukrainians who live in this town where I live in. So I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, this is a really important point, is that the Russians and Ukrainians are brother peoples, right? From the perspective of the West, this isn't sending Germans or French or British people to die. This is sending effectively Russians to fight Russians. You know what I mean? You have to look at it cynically from that perspective when you talk about international relations. And the other point to consider here is that it's not just the Ukrainian men that are dying. It's the Ukrainian women that are leaving Ukraine, most likely never to come back. Europe is, as a whole, does want more young people to come into the country generally, or to come into the various countries of Europe, generally speaking. Having those be white Eastern Europeans is generally an easier thing for them to integrate than, Syrian refugees and that kind of thing. So it's these people are going to be welcomed there, and most of them are not going to come back to Ukraine even after the war, even in the best case scenario.
I remember before the war started, there was a lot of instances on Ukrainian language propaganda news stations that where you would see Ukrainian people straight up say stuff like, there's a lot of useless people on those lands, that there's a lot of people that we need to get rid of that are worth getting rid of.